folks. Thanks very much for joining our Monday Mindshare. And today we want to spend a little bit of time talking about mental fatigue and how it affects physical performance. And obviously we know that mental fatigue can affect our cognitive function, but sometimes it's less understood just as we get into more intense or longer duration sessions affecting our physical performance. And we talk a lot about rate of perceived exertion in endurance sport and in training. And I'm going to jump into that. I'm going to share with you how the association between mental fatigue can affect your physical performance. And I hope you can stay with me as we go through this. Let me share with you some content first to help you connect the dots, if you will, between mental fatigue and physical performance. Okay, so let's jump into a few papers here. This one's about 6 years old, and it begins to connect the dots, if you will, between one of the most important factors responsible for the negative impact of mental fatigue on endurance performance is higher perceived exertion. Now, the duration, of course, of intensity and the physical task or the intensity of the physical exercise clearly will affect your physical performance, but it's not that the mental fatigue itself will affect physical performance as a function of duration or intensity, but more about how mental fatigue is actually creating a higher perceived exertion, and the higher perceived exertion is beginning to affect your physical performance. Let's look at another paper that goes a little deeper into this, and it really talks about the spillover effect. Now, traditionally, of course, we would understand endurance performance being, effectively limited by things like heart rate, lactate, neuromuscular function, and things like this, but not so much affected by mental fatigue. But rather, this paper again suggests that the negative impact of mental fatigue on endurance performance is primarily mediated again by greater perceived perception, if you will, of effort. And we're going to go into now exactly where is this coming from? Why is it that how we perceive effort is changing the way that we can size and judge and understand effort, and as a function of that, increase our mental fatigue, and as a function of that, directly have a negative effect on our physical performance and physical fatigue. And this study begins, this is 2021, only a few years ago, beginning to connect the dots between, if you will, a speeding up in the rise of how we perceive the effort. And it is to do with a number of, not just one, but a number of different neurotransmitters, and how those levels, as they change through endurance exercise, begin to affect how we perceive exertion. And this is playing an important role in this mental fatigue, and then as a function of that, physical fatigue. And particularly, this paper began to talk and call out probably the more important implicated neurotransmitters here are that of dopamine and adenosine. So most recently, 2023, this paper came out, and this is actually not a study that was done with athletes per se, but with respect to patients of Parkinson's disease, and really trying to understand how dopamine can facilitate the translation, if you will, of physical exertion into how the mind assesses effort. And just in the opening paragraph, it talks about this role of dopamine on translating the features of motor performance or muscle performance into the judgment of effort. And further into the paper, when you get into the discussion area, you read a little bit about prior studies, if you will, talking about increased dopamine availability aligning with effort-based choices, which has found that dopamine increased the likelihood of selecting high effort options consistent with decreased levels of effort aversion. So this is meaning that having dopamine access, if you will, or levels of dopamine availability allows us to embrace, if you will, higher effort options, allows us to not shy away or avert ourselves from levels of effort, but actually to embrace it. And that is, of course, what we're looking for in training and racing. And this particular study just concluded with, we demonstrate that the role of dopamine in influencing how we, the assessment of effort and associated effort-based decision-making, and more accurately being understand, if you will, the performance of the physical performance and being able to judge our effort in the spirit of, delaying the rise of, perceived exertion, mental fatigue. And as a function of that, delaying that, we can delay also our physical fatigue and performance. So probably a year ago, we published a video, and this QR code, and I'll put the link up here also on this. The video basically goes through the function of caffeine and L-carnitine and its role in the brain with respect to two things. One was improving fat oxidation efficiency, and secondly was about this impact of caffeine and L-carnitine on dopamine, and how these two things can, through dopamine, affect rate of perceived exertion. Caffeine, of course, is not working on stimulating the release of more dopamine, but rather improving the receptors' availability to actually receive dopamine in the brain and the neurotransmitter clefts, whereby it is increasing the reception and thereby increasing the stimulus as a function of that dopamine reception. L-carnitine, on the other hand, is actually improving the dopamine release. Now, one of the things we talk about in this video, and you can take a listen to it, is that the problem with a lot of course, drinks and foodstuffs with caffeine, of course, is that it's very unpredictable caffeine levels. 300% difference can be in, things like chocolate and teas and coffees and what have you. And a lot of these are also attached to sugar. So by, using a measured dose of caffeine and L-carnitine, you can begin to baseline yourself of a given input of caffeine, and you can jump on your trainer or your treadmill and begin to ramp different intensities and really start to take note between, mental fatigue, mental mindset, rate of perceived exertion, heart rate, and intensity levels. And you can do that, of course, with different durations and really understand better how this is affecting and working for you in a positive way, that you can embrace higher intensity sessions, you can embrace longer sessions, whether that's, as I say, in training or in racing. So hopefully you find that interesting, and you can apply the SFuels Prime product where you have those true measured doses of caffeine and L-carnitine to help set that baseline for you and learn how to embrace your workouts and your training of high intensity and longer duration more efficiently and effectively. And with that, I wish you all the best in going longer in your racing this year. Thanks again for joining. Talk soon. Bye-bye.